In 1 week, I start my new job at id Software, the world-renowned creators of games like Doom, Doom Eternal, Doom 2, Doom 3, Doom 3 BFG, and let's not forget Doom 3 BFG Wii. Also Quake. And this is pretty much a dream job. I'm really excited and I want to do well. So this video is covering some of the steps that I'm taking in order to prepare for the job, and also I'll give you some tips in case you're in a similar position and you're preparing for a new job in the video game industry. Also, this video has time codes, so feel free to grab the bar on the bottom there and jump between different sections that might interest you. Let's jump into it. First things first, before I focus on id Software, I wanted to reflect on the interview experience as a whole. If you're like most people, you probably interviewed for a few different companies, and hopefully some of those interviews landed you offers. Some of the other interviews probably got you a rejection, unfortunately. And so it's important to see the positives and the negatives to figure out what you did right and then what you did wrong. So on the right side, it's important to figure out which of your stories resonated with people. Which ones did they find interesting? Sometimes the projects we're really proud of are not always the ones that make the best stories. And so you want to figure out which projects are going to not only entertain somebody, but also show that you have the technical capabilities that they're looking for. For example, I realized that one of the projects that people were most interested in hearing about was my work on Call of Duty Warzone, specifically the Festive Fervor Elves. I faced a lot of surprise problems during that project, which made for an interesting story, in addition to it being a strong part of my portfolio. Sometimes the best projects to share are not just ones that are technically impressive, but about topics that people like to hear about. Speaking of things that people like, don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying the video. So that's all the good stuff, in other words, what we did right, but it's probably more important for you to focus on everything that you got wrong in the interview. So whenever I would finish an interview, I'd write down all the questions I got wrong and then follow up by researching what the correct answer would have been. So for example, one of the problems that I got wrong was I severely underestimated the cost of a multi-threaded context switch when comparing the performance analysis of a mutex versus a spin lock. And so I took some time after the interview to read up on that and better understand an intuition for those topics. Not only for the sake of passing a future interview, but in order to improve myself for the work I'm going to be doing on the day-to-day. By the way, if you're having a little bit of trouble with the technical interview side, I wrote a book on the subject. It's free, and I will link it in the description of this video. You could check it out in case you're having some trouble with that. It'll go through the technical topics, and then it will give you some practice problems that you could use to prepare. And actually, I just had two people reach out to me on LinkedIn. One of them said, you know, she had wanted to work for Epic, and this helped her land the position for a Fortnite internship. So, hey, maybe it could happen for you. Also, don't just focus on the technical questions you got wrong. It's important to talk about maybe the non-technical questions you could have improved on as well. For example, I was interviewing with the Bethesda team, and they asked me why I did not previously accept a role to work on Fallout 76. So I told the recruiter, I said, oh, you know, the product didn't release at the quality bar that I would have been proud of. I wouldn't have felt comfortable maybe putting my name on it at the state that it released. And that was not the correct answer. I never heard from that recruiter again. So if I want to apply for Bethesda again, I need to make sure I revisit that question and I come up with a good answer. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. It's not just the technical questions that could sink the opportunity. During these interviews, I identified that one of my weak spots in my current experience was that I hadn't played a lot of the latest games. So in one of my interviews, I received a rapid-fire series of questions where they asked me if I had played Jedi: The Fallen Order, the new Guardians of the Galaxy game, or Insomniac's Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And I was very embarrassed to say I hadn't played any of those games, which I think reflected very poorly on me because it's important to stay up to date so that you could speak to some of the latest designs and gameplay decisions that are coming out. So one of the things I immediately did was I went to Steam, I went through my backlog library, and I played as many of the games as I could. And in some cases, when it wasn't on sale for Steam, it was cheaper for me to go to eBay and buy a used copy of the game for the PlayStation. So whatever's cheaper, honestly, do whatever works for you. So I typically buy those games one at a time whenever they come on sale. But if there's a broader catalog of games that you're trying to get through, it might be beneficial for you to sign up for some sort of subscription service. So for example, in the past, I've signed up for Xbox Game Pass.
Game Pass has PC games. Yeah, we do.
and I found that actually really effective. If you're trying to apply for like a mobile game company, there's also one for Apple and one for Google Play as well. So there's a lot of great opportunities there in case you might choose to subscribe. And speaking of which, there's a great channel you should subscribe to, this channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down there if you want more content like this one. And hey, maybe if you hit that subscribe button, something special will happen. Now, I played a lot of different games, including games from genres that weren't my favorite or that I didn't have a lot of experience with. For example, I played a JRPG called Persona 5. Now, you're probably wondering, what does a JRPG like Persona 5 have to do with an FPS game like Doom? And the answer is probably not a lot, but it might introduce you to some concepts or designs that you wouldn't be exposed to if you only played games from within your favorite genre. And to be honest, I think this is something that we as developers could all do a little bit better. I can't tell you how many students, when I was teaching at Stanford, would come up to me and say, yes, I want to make games. And I'd say, oh, okay, what kind of games do you want to make? And they'd say, oh, I want to make League. I love to play League. And I'd say, oh, okay, do you play any other games? And they say, nope, just League. And even if you just want to work for one game and your sole focus in life is to work for Riot or something like that, there's a lot you could learn from branching out a little bit and trying other games from even within that genre or beyond that genre. So here's a concrete example. In Persona 5, I was delighted to find this mechanic called the Baton Pass. The Baton Pass is a mechanic that rewards you for having different characters on your team do attacks. So if one of your characters on your team does a little bit of damage, they can do a baton pass so that another character can do a little bit of damage as well. But when that second character acts, they get a buff so that they do a little bit more damage. And so this incentivizes players to not just have one of their characters be the damage dealer, and basically only one of their characters does all the damage. And you know, this actually reminded me of a design decision that the team made for Doom Eternal. Because one of the big things that was different with Doom Eternal versus the previous Doom 2016 is that it severely limited the base amount of ammo you had in your guns. And in order to play the game, you constantly had to switch between your weapons in order to use the limited supply of ammo that you had. Or if you ran out of ammo, then you had to switch to a specific weapon called the chainsaw in order to recoup that ammo in order to start fighting again. So just like in Persona 5, where they wanted you to incentivize players to not do all their damage with just one character, the creative directors of Doom Eternal wanted to incentivize players to not do all of their damage with just one weapon. The Doom creative team chose to punish players. If they just used one weapon, they'd run out of the ammo, and they'd prevent them completely from using it again, basically. And I found this a very frustrating experience, right? People constantly, if you go on Metacritic or you look at like the 1 review stars, that's, I think, the most common complaint, is that people are complaining that there's no ammo in the game and that they keep running out of ammo. But the Baton Pass gave me an interesting idea. What if instead of punishing players for just using one weapon, we rewarded them for switching to different weapons during combat? So, I mean, maybe this could just be a base damage buff like Persona 5 does, or maybe it could be some sort of cool elemental combination. So, for example, maybe you can hit an enemy with a frost weapon, and then if he's frozen, you can shoot at him with the plasma gun in order to make him explode. Like currently the shields work in that way. You can explode shields. What if you could explode frozen enemies? And then maybe that could potentially damage nearby enemies who are hit by the explosion impact, right? So that would incentivize players to switch between these two weapons in order to get that cool combination. And, you know, again, we're just brainstorming here, but hopefully that gives you an idea or some insight into how my mind works with respect to how I might deconstruct a design decision from one game and figure out how we could take those pieces and apply it to solving a similar problem in a different game.
The next day.
So we talked a little bit about playing games outside of your comfort zone, but it's also really important to play games that speak to the history of the studio that you're going to work for. So in the case of id Software, I don't know what kind of game they're going to work on next, but given the history of the studio, and I also checked out some fan theory channels, it seems like it's probably going to be something either related to Doom or Quake. So that's just my best guess. But what I decided to do was play a bunch of Doom games and then play a bunch of Quake games to hopefully build up my lexicon and my experience with respect to those franchises. Of course, the most important game to play is their most recent game. So in this case, the most recent game id made was Doom Eternal. And the reason why that's really important is because during the design process, it's very common that a member of the team will say something like, "Oh, we need to make this new game in such a way that it has an enemy introduction similar to how a previous game had the enemy introduction." So they might say, "We want to introduce this guy like we introduced a Pinky in the second level of Doom Eternal," or something like that. Basically, they're relying on everyone in the room having a common understanding of what the player experience was like on the previous game. In this particular case, I think it was also very important for me to play the game at as high a difficulty setting as I could. This is because sometimes when you're playing at a low difficulty setting, it's easy to coast by and not have to really engage with the game's mechanics on a fundamental level. Like, for example, maybe you don't have to worry about your health getting low if you play on easy mode because your health never gets low, so you never really learn what that's like from a player perspective. Oftentimes, some of the mechanics, in order to truly master them, you need to push yourself to your limit and going up to as high a difficulty setting as possible. One recommendation I have is to, if maybe you don't feel comfortable playing at the highest level setting, is to check out a Let's Play of maybe an experienced player of that genre, so they can give you a perspective of what it's like to get that high level gameplay. And I would also recommend checking out speedruns for a game. It's, in the case of a speedrun, the player is trying to get through the game as fast as possible, so it's often the case that they'll utilize whatever is the, best, most effective method for solving the combat. However, something you should watch out for if you are going to be checking out speedruns is they often make use of glitches or hacks in order to skip sections of the game, and that's certainly the case of Doom. So in those cases, I would recommend you use speedruns that are considered glitchless. So often there'll be a category for a speedrun game called glitchless or hackless category, and so in that case, they will not use any glitches. They'll just use the game sort of closer to the way it was meant to be played. So in those cases, you may want to be aware of that when you're checking out speedruns. If you see them like jump through the wall or something, that probably isn't reflective of what most of the players are going to be experiencing. And finally, I think it's also important to engage with any other adjacent media that might be relevant for the game. So in some cases, you might want to play a board game if that's, a tangent. Maybe if this game has some sort of book related to it, you might want to read the book. Or in many cases, you might want to check out any movies that are related to the game. Now, it's very common for designers to reference film examples in order to explain the sort of mood that they're going for or some of the characterization that they're trying to do. And I actually had an opportunity where Doom and id Software had a documentary created by NoClip, Danny O'Dwyer's studio. And that was great because I got to see some of the creative directors talking about the game and some of the influences that they had from a film background. And so whenever they would mention a movie, for example, the creative director, Hugo, this guy talks about RoboCop a lot, I'd write it down. And then recently I've just been watching as many of those movies as I could. Also, when I did an interview with the team, I talked to them about the different film influences that are going to inform the next game. And so I wrote those films and those games down as well, and I've been checking those out. So, for example, RoboCop, I watched the movie RoboCop, and I thought about some ways in which that might have informed the Doom character. And that's pretty much it. So hopefully these tips were helpful if you're preparing for a new job, and if not, then hopefully it was somewhat entertaining. Here's a video that you could check out if you're interested in the story of how I accidentally stole a desk from my boss, Mark Zuckerberg. And then here's a video about what it was like to work at my previous job on Call of Duty. So that's it for the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to check out more videos similar to this one. I'll see you then. Bye.